Hello and welcome to Tech 5 for July 18, 2019. This is coming out a few days late, but next week we should be back on schedule. So, Ross Perot has passed away. You've probably heard. You may or may not know that his professional life was largely a tech story. He worked at IBM selling computers to business, and in the year that he left to found his own company, Electronic Data Systems, he had made his sales quota for the year during January, so he's quite a gifted salesman. He started EDS. EDS processed Social Security check issuance and other kinds of insurance claims, I believe. They processed stuff like that, but they got contracts with the federal government, among others, to do that sort of thing. And then, and that is here, and I'll have links to everything in the description. Then he went on to invest in other companies because he made quite a fortune from the IPO of EDS in 1968. And so he, here in the Seattle Times, 1992, talks about how he wished he had bought Microsoft from Bill Gates when he had the opportunity. He said that their prices just didn't line up. Then, I think, in an effort to try to make up for having missed that boat, when Steve Jobs left Apple to found his own company, Next Computer, in the mid-'80s, Perot was the major investor. He invested $20 million of his own money and convinced other investors to follow after him in investing in Next. Also in the late 80s, after he sold EDS, he founded Perot Systems, which is another basically IT services company. And this is a really fun piece. Someone who worked at Next recalls working with both Steve Jobs and Ross Perot and trying to get them to work together productively. It's a really fun piece. All right, now just a quick story here. If you use a Chromecast, you probably know that you haven't been able to cast Amazon Prime or Amazon videos to your Chromecast. Well, they've finally got that working. Of course, it was never a hardware problem, but only a business problem. Amazon wanted to encourage people to buy their Kindle Fire and other basically proprietary devices to do streaming of Amazon videos. And so now that's available, and that's on iOS and Android and you name it. All right, now this story. Google admits listening to some smart speaker recordings. So it seems that in order to train the Google speaker to recognize, or not the speaker itself, but the system in the cloud that it sends the recordings to, they want the wake word, so hey Google or whatever you're using. I know that you can choose with Alexa. I don't remember whether you have options with the Google Home Assistant, but in any case, when people are speaking, these Home Assistant speakers are listening all the time. So if you say something that sounds similar to OK Google, but it isn't exactly that, the speaker may start recording you, and you may say things after that that you'd really prefer Google didn't have a record of for whatever reason. And so this is at least Google's side of the story, that they're trying to train the speaker only to wake up when you meant to wake it up. But that means at a certain point, when their models, their computer models in code that they've developed through machine learning, when they're unable to distinguish between two samples, it's Google's practice to bring in humans to see what was said, transcribe it, and understand why the software wasn't able to discern the difference between the wake word and not the wake word. But unfortunately, someone released a few of these samples of recorded speech from the Netherlands. And so this, for me, this comes down to, you should just be aware. If you have a smart home assistant, it's just listening to you all the time. Whether it's recording you all the time, who knows? Whether it's recording you at any given time, really, who knows? And where those recordings may end up eventually, who knows? So you're taking a chance by using, in exchange for the convenience. And it's just good to be aware of that. Now, 3 related stories. They're not really related, but they share in common that they are all non-US space stories. Since it's been 50 years since the Apollo 11 launch, I thought it would be nice to sort of look and see what other countries are doing now. And I think it's fair to say inspired by that mission in large part. So Japan has landed the Hayabusa 2 probe on an asteroid, the same asteroid, a second time, and managed to collect samples from under the surface. The probe initially went in April and set off an explosive charge that kicked up a small crater on the surface. Then, after a few months, letting the dust settle or float away, the probe returned to the surface and was able to dig up some samples, and it's going to be heading back now. And this is a little article about the bomb that the probe shot at the asteroid in the first place. So this is a first of its kind mission. Then the EU has its own GPS satellites that they don't call GPS. So the US obviously started this, and the US GPS system, I believe, is the most accurate. That's just from memory. Things may have changed, but I believe so. Although the data available to the public is not as precise as the data available to the U.S. military. But anyway, and also Russia has its own set of positioning satellites. So the European system that's called Galileo was down, and there was no reason given. It happens to be that today it's back up and working again, and they're going to do a big study to find out why it was that these satellites went offline in the first place. And here's a very heartwarming story about India sending a probe to the moon, and how school children in India are very excited about it. So this is a nice feel-good story, and it's also interesting that it brings up why it is they're going where they are going on the moon. They're going to the South Pole, where it's thought that under the surface there are large deposits of helium-3, a form of helium that's almost never found on Earth, but which could be used to power nuclear fusion reactors. So potentially, they say, this helium-3 soil could be worth something like $3 million per kilogram. So not only India, but also China and Russia are in the process of sending their own probes to sample the soil at the South Pole of the moon. So that's that. Now, just a quick follow-up on a story that I did before. the 737 MAX looks like the timetable keeps being pushed back for when these planes are going to be recertified by the Federal Aviation Administration. And the 737 MAX being grounded is affecting Southwest Airlines more than any other carrier, because they had gone in pretty heavily on these planes. So that's the update, that they may not be back in the air until next year. And finally, biotech story, although this is a bit more of a surgery tech story. They were able to reroute nerves in a number of young people who had sustained what appears to be severe neck injuries. And they were able to regain the limited use of their elbows and hands. It's really a great advance. I do want to say that I had read some other similar stories, and I learned that a lot of people who live with disabilities of one form or other can be a little put off by the sort of excitement that stories like this inspire, because it didn't work for everyone. It only gave them a limited mobility. It works best immediately after the injury, so within the year to year and a half after the injury, and so on. There are a lot of caveats. There are a lot of filters as far as for whom this will work and how well it works. And so I think it's worth remembering whenever you read one of these stories about an exciting advance, this or that, potential cure for a disease or so forth, that people who are dealing with some type of injury or some type of disease, that they not only have to deal with that injury, but they also have to deal with this constant false hope in many cases. Not to end this whole thing on a downer, but I think it's only fair to give that side of the equation too. As I said before, many stories that have to do with medical advances or advances in biotechnology have this sort of cheerful press release quality to them, and it is inspiring and it is exciting, but it's only fair to say that this is a small step, which I guess is appropriate for the Apollo 11 week. It's a small step, but it's a big step. So, thank you for being here for this slightly longer episode, and I will see you next time. If you'd like to get in touch with me, if you have ideas for stories that you would like me to cover, please let me know. You can always reach me on Twitter. Thanks.